Her stepfather locked her in a barn for 2 years. A traveling preacher heard her singing hymns. The latch on that barn door was iron, rusted orange at the hinge, and somebody had oiled it recent enough that it didn't squeal when it moved. That's the detail that stopped me, not the singing yet, the quiet of that latch. I'd been riding the Cimarron circuit 4 years by then, a preacher in name more than calling, if I'm honest about it. I carried a Bible with a cracked spine and a coat that didn't keep the wind out anymore, and I went where there was $1 in the plate or a meal at a table, and I told myself God's work didn't care which. Most towns forgot my name before I crossed back over their line. I'd gotten used to that. A man gets used to a lot of things he shouldn't. It was October, cold enough that my breath hung in front of my horse's ears when I heard it. Thin as wire, coming off the wind from somewhere past the tree line. A hymn. Not a hymn I knew exact, but close enough to one, "Shall We Gather at the River," slowed down, like she was singing to keep time with something other than the tune. I followed it to a homestead with a house gone gray from weather and a barn that looked tended better than the house did. That told me something right off. A man takes care of the thing he's hiding. I knocked at the house first, the way you're supposed to. A man came out with a face like a closed fist, said there wasn't a singer here, said I'd heard wind in the boards, said it sharp enough that I knew he was lying before he finished the sentence. I'd heard a lot of lies in 4 years of knocking on doors. You learn the shape of them. I didn't argue with him, I just didn't leave. I made camp down the road where I could still see his roofline, and I waited for full dark, and around 9 that latch turned under my hand without a sound, just like I figured, because he'd oiled it to keep it quiet, not to keep it shut. She was sitting on a feed sack with a blanket around her shoulders that had more holes than wool, and she didn't scream when the door opened. That's the thing I think about most, looking back. She didn't scream. She just stopped singing mid-line and looked at me like she was waiting to find out what kind of trouble I was. Her name was Ruth. I didn't know that yet. What I knew was the smell of that barn, hay gone sour in the corners, and under it something colder like a place that hadn't had a window opened in a long while. And I knew the look of her hands, raw across the knuckles, the kind of raw you get from cold and rope both. "You the preacher," she said, not a question. "Folks call me that. He'll shoot you for coming in here. He's welcome to try." I want to say I felt something noble standing in that doorway. I didn't. I felt my own heart going hard and fast, and I felt, underneath that, something I hadn't felt much in 4 years of being a man nobody waited on useful, needed for an actual thing, not a Sunday performance. I held my hand out to her like she was a spooked colt, because that's about what she was. She didn't take it right away. 2 years locked in a barn teaches a person that hands aren't always kind. I understood that. I'd had my own years of being handled rough by men who called it discipline. So I just stood there with my hand out and let her decide on her own time, and after a while, not long, but long enough that my arm started to ache from holding it steady, she took it. Her stepfather, a man named Cole Hartley, came out onto the porch with a shotgun before we'd cleared the yard. I put Ruth behind me without thinking on it, the way you'd put a hand over a lit candle in a wind. I told him plain that I was taking her, and that if he wanted to make a thing of God's business with me, he could try, but he'd answer for it in this life before he answered for it in the next. I don't know where the words came from. They weren't in my Bible. They came from somewhere lower down. He didn't fire. Men like that mostly don't once somebody finally stands up the right way. They count on nobody ever doing it. We rode through the night, Ruth on the back of my horse with her arms tight around my middle, not saying much, and I kept waiting for her to ask where we were headed, and she never did. I think she'd learned not to ask things. I think 2 years in a dark barn teaches a body that questions don't get answered, they just get punished. I took her to the widow Calloway's place outside Brody Flats, a woman I'd known from circuit work who didn't ask the kind of questions that didn't need asking. Ruth stayed there through that winter while I kept riding my route, coming back through every few weeks with what little I'd collected: flour, a length of wool cloth, a jar of honey I'd traded a sermon for. Small things. I never had much to give. I gave what I had. She started talking by February. Not much. But she told me her mother had died when she was 14, and Hartley had married again within the year, some woman who left soon after, and that's when the barn started. She said he told the town she was simple, that she had spells, that it was safer for everyone if she stayed put. She said the singing was the only thing he couldn't take off her, because he couldn't get inside a song the way he could get inside a room. I didn't tell her what to feel about any of that. I just sat with her on the widow's porch steps while she said it, and I let the quiet after it sit there too, because some things a man fills with words and ruins, and some things he just lets be heard. By spring she was singing again, out loud in daylight where anybody passing could hear. First time she did it I was splitting wood out back and I stopped mid-swing, axe still up over my shoulder just to listen. She caught me listening, didn't stop singing, just smiled a little around the words like she'd caught me at something and didn't mind. It was June when Hartley came looking. He brought 2 men from town with him, men who owed him money or favors, the kind that come along for a fight that isn't theirs because it's easier than saying no. They found me at the widow's gate. I won't pretend I was a fighting man. I'd thrown maybe 3 punches in my whole life before that afternoon, and 2 of them missed. But I stood that gate same as I'd stood that barn door, and I told them the girl wasn't simple and she wasn't his property, and if they wanted to test which one of those facts was wrong, they could start with me. One of the men went for his belt. I didn't wait to see what was on it. I put him down hard, my knuckles splitting open on his jaw, and the second man looked at Hartley like he was waiting for instructions that weren't coming. And Hartley, who'd kept a girl in the dark for 2 winters and called it mercy. Hartley just stood there with his hands shaking, because it turns out a man who only knows how to be cruel to somebody locked up doesn't know what to do with somebody standing. Ruth came out onto the porch behind me. I heard the door before I heard her. She didn't run to me crying, didn't make a scene of it. She just walked down those steps slow and deliberate, past me, right up to Hartley, and looked him dead in the face for what I'd guess was the first time in 2 years without a locked door between them. "You don't get to look at me like I'm yours anymore," she said. Then she turned around and put her hand flat against my chest, right over my busted knuckles where I was holding my own fist against the ache of it, and she said it plain, no flourish to it, the way she'd say the weather. "He's the one who came for me. Not you, him." Hartley left, didn't come back. Men like that don't, once the thing they've been counting on that nobody will stand up turns out false. That was 4 years ago now. I quit the circuit not long after, settled outside Brody Flats on 40 acres the widow helped me lease, and Ruth and I were married that fall in a church that actually had a roof on it, which after my years of preaching under open sky and leaking tents, felt like its own kind of miracle. She still sings. Mornings mostly doing the wash or feeding the chickens, that same hymn sometimes, slower than the hymn book has it, the way she sang it the night I found her. I never tell her to stop. I just stand wherever I am and listen, same as I did splitting that wood, and she still catches me at it, and she still doesn't stop singing. Last week she found me out by the fence line, mending a post that didn't strictly need mending, and she came up quiet behind me and put her arms around my middle the way she did on that first ride out of Hartley's yard. Except this time there was no barn behind us and no shotgun ahead. Just the fence and the wind, and her chin resting between my shoulder blades like it had found the one place in the world it was meant to rest. "You're a good man," she said, not loud, just true the way she says most things. I didn't say anything back. Some things a man just lets be heard. I went on mending the post that didn't need it, and she stayed where she was, and the wind moved through the grass the way it does, and that was enough. That was more than enough. That was the whole of what I'd ever wanted, and I hadn't even known to ask for it until she gave it to me anyway.